Awesome.
Liam, how are you doing?
I'm well, man. How's your day been? What have you been up to?
Day's been good. I think I told you a couple days ago we put money down on a motorhome, and we actually were going back and forth. That might just end up being a shopping fee, and actually we might be able to get that money back because we thought maybe we were going a little too long as far as the home on wheels. And also it had a few things that we would have to do like inside to make it kind of what we wanted. And so anyway, we might pull the plug on that. And we went and looked at another RV today that was not quite so long and had a lot of the things we wanted inside already. And we think we'll be able to rig it. So our king size bed, which is a huge checklist item for both me and Shaylin. It looks like the king size bed will fit inside, maybe potentially be the loft above the driving cab. But anyway, yeah, we're like moving forward with well, we live the adventure lifestyle, but we're moving forward with some very concrete examples of that being totally apparent from any angle you look at it.
Right on.
What about you?
Shit, my bad. Today was pleasant. I had a chance to catch up on some Andy Kaufman videos, and stroll around the backyard. So it was pretty nice. Yeah, it's been good. So we want to talk about walking. You wanna take the lead with first questions here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it may have come across in some of our other episodes that I'm rather romantic about walking, like it's a love story. And I don't think it's a love story that is in any way, shape, or form done. It's almost maybe just begun. But I'm in love with walking. I've it's been a part of my life since I've known. And maybe like most people, right, we learn how to walk, and that's a very fun, if we could remember like learning how to walk, that would probably be one of the most exhilarating and like present moment filled, like with so much our brain just firing on so many wonderful levels. Like if we could remember that, and maybe it's good that we really weren't, thinking in words at that point. Maybe it's good that we can't remember it in certain ways, but man, walking, we're going to talk a lot about it today. So I don't want to jump into it in a rush kind of way, but yeah, the topic is walking. We thought that would be a good one. What are some of your introductory thoughts on walking?
That I've definitely, I should disclaim myself as someone who's put far more conscious thought into each step than probably average, and that's also not something I'm particularly proud of either. I think it's fairly bizarre, and that's sort of it gets into I guess, like, well, why would you walk? Why would you walk? And of course, something we've touched on in the past is the idea that we need exercise to make up for the fact that we're not living the lives that our bodies evolved to. So like taking steps or walking has always been, up until a couple centuries ago, like not an optional part of life. And now you see people who are able to literally live like all the time just in a chair. It's wild.
It's wild. And so even that word steps, like anyone who knows me close knows that like I just abhor that, like, not the person, but the habit of speech, or the trend of saying like, oh, I got 10,000 steps in today. Or or the people who like keep track of their steps with an app, or even the people who are like totally fine. But just the habit of like monitoring how many miles you've walked, and then like reporting that to their friends or to people, like, oh, I walked, as if that matters. Like, I don't give a fuck how much you walked. Like, I like, for me, like, and so this is good because we'll get into like all the different reasons someone might walk. And there is like the some people think it's like a great exercise, and some people think it's great for your health, and I think these things too. And some people think like it's active recovery. That's one of the things I want to get into. Like, what does that even mean? And is it active recovery, or is it exercise, or is it something else? And does it, obviously it matters who the person is as far as what it means. And a lot of times for me, it's just like, it's like basic medicine, in the sense that like I feel a certain kind of way when I'm out strolling, and it becomes a way for me to slow down life and process thoughts, maybe even like kind of a therapy. But I certainly notice, and we talked about this in one of our earlier episodes, that our quality of thinking is certainly different when we're mobile, when we're moving around, than if we were stationary, if we were sitting, if we were sitting for 2 hours. Those thoughts that happen after we're sitting for 2 hours are going to be remarkably different, have a different tone to them than the energy of thinking after a casual stroll, for example. And then there's like, are we talking about walking through the city? Are we talking about walking as a form of transportation, or as a form of locomotion to get, from one place to another place? Because these are all different kind of ideas on walking. And I think it'll be fun to, kind of from the hip, like just talk about walking. I'm looking forward to this.
So you mentioned step counters, and that was something that I wrote down because it's something I wanted to address. And I do sympathize with your aversion to them. And I had to think about what it was that made me in particular so opposed to them. And it's really just a matter of uh, the perspective on reality that is prerequisite to see the value in a step counter. And that perspective on reality, I think, is characterized by a value of a quantitative and discrete, digitalized, highly sort of separate way of thinking, this hyper classification and categorization, and yeah, in general, just digitized. Like, there's one step and then there's another step, rather than looking at it as a constant process of your body moving. So I guess I kind of want to start with like a disclaimer, because obviously we want to talk about what we want to talk about, but walking is healthy, like it is health promoting, and I would describe it in one word as tonic. I feel like you can overdo it. You can easily overdo it. It's not something to do all the time just anyway. However, it does seem to have a general tonic effect on basically any state that the body is in. And I think that speaks to just how mobile and consequentially not sedentary we really are designed to be. So I guess I
Speaking
would.
of tonic,
Yeah,
I got this in my pocket. I don't
yeah,
know
I
when I'm
know.
gonna dip into it, but
Right.
it'll be
I
fun.
had to go and also pick up some tonic water right before I came here. So
So Fever Tree, are you watching?
yeah.
I drink a lot of you.
So I think that also kind of gets into that like heads off why the heart of the difference in how I think I see walking versus uh what we sort of promote, especially with the emphasis on the step counting, is I don't really, I find myself pacing quite often. And sometimes it'll be an anxious pace and sometimes it'll be a calm and collected pace. But I know that when I'm just living my life and I have space around me, especially if I'm not like stuck in the car or living in a tiny apartment, I tend to just move around my environment step by step and stay upright, not standing in one place, but walking. And the idea that we would need to take walks and make and set aside time just for the sake of getting in steps is really bizarre to me, because I
It's bizarre
feel.
to me. Yeah, yeah,
Go ahead.
obviously. No, it's obviously bizarre to me too. That's one of the reasons we're getting into it like this. Go ahead and continue.
So I guess there's going along with speaking to what value, like speaking to the state of the industry and how we see walking. Everyone's like, all right, well, you should get 10,000 steps in every day. uh I would argue that it's probably wiser if you really do need to like supplement your steps, and you're stuck in an office job, you drive a lot, right? You need to take walks just to get your steps in. It seems like a better strategy, like practical advice, better strategy to take 3 shorter walks rather than 1 longer walk. And that being said, what I wanted to ask you, the questions that I really had for you were like, what do you see going on from a biomechanical perspective when someone is walking?
Well,
What
before
comes to
I get
mind?
into that, yeah,
How would you
before I
describe walking?
before I get into that, I'll kind of touch on not that I'm skirting that question. I'll just put it on the back burner for a minute. Like I want to touch on some of the things you said, because and I'll say too, like you said, walking is healthy, like no doubt. Like it's probably in my mind one of the healthiest things you could do. It's also, I think, something that can contribute to like improve body composition and fat loss. Like if you walk a lot, like it's a natural contributor to like having a good looking body that feels good. Like, so these are very like, fitness industry goal, like, common fitness industry kind of goals. And so there's no doubt like walking is all of that. But then for me, for a long time, anything that I tap into, it's become more about like the feeling. And you talked about tonic, and like that it's not I'm doing it because I like want to get like some result out of it. It's because how it makes me feel, right? Like, and I think you're hitting on this. When I did some research on like Aristotle and the peripatetic school, that like that word peripatetic was coined, I think, because of Aristotle, because his students recognized that when he lectured, he would literally never stand still. Like he would pace. And I think that was a word that was brought up about him. He would literally pace around them and all over the place as he lectured. So they came up with that word peripatetic. And have you ever watched like a young human on the floor, like watching a movie or reading a book? Like, have you noticed that they like it, as long as they haven't yet been fucked up by conventional kind of modes of living and being, they're constantly shifting. Like every couple seconds, or at least every few minutes, like young humans are constantly changing the position they're in. So that to me also speaks to what you were talking about. Like, why do we need to put in an extra, amount of time for this like exercise of walking, other than because it feels so fucking good to get out and to walk and to see how it changes the nature of our thinking. Like, for example, I learned about Nietzsche, that he wrote like whole entire books while he walked. Like he had a notebook that he would keep in his pocket or in his bag or whatever he carried around, and he would walk 8 or 9 hours a day sometimes, and he would scribble notes in these notebooks, and they literally became almost entirely from those notes his books. And also, I thought was interesting about Nietzsche, apparently his mental health was considered very good. I mean, because I think one of the things we hear about Nietzsche is that he suffered some real mental health issues. But apparently his mental health was really thought to be really good and really healthy until he became bedridden, until he couldn't be mobile anymore. So that was maybe correlated with some of his kind of mental downfallings. So that's just a few interesting things. As far as the biomechanics of walking, I'd be curious to hear you talk about that, because for me, I know Katie Bowman has written some really good things on walking, and she probably can touch on some of the biomechanic kind of things going on with walking. But for me, it's like we're bipedal. We're bipedal creatures. We're obviously clearly like designed to move on 2 feet. We learn how to walk. Before we learn how to walk, we learn how to crawl. Before we learn how to crawl, we learn how to roll over, right? These are very developmental processes, which, because of the cross gating, or the like one side goes, the other side goes in the other direction. We're like, in a sense, like cross gating as we walk. Like that's what we're learning, some of those skills in crawling. And so I think that goes into it, but I'm curious to hear your stance on the biomechanical, because I definitely come from more of a place of like feeling the I try all different kinds of options of walking. I get really into it sometimes, and for me it's really just about discovering, for that walk or that adventure or whatever it is, like what feels the most natural, what feels the most right for that moment, which is always changing and is always discoverable newly. So I'm curious, like biomechanically, like what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just wanted to start with the word biomechanical because I kind of wanted to build upon it from the skeleton up, not for any particular reason, but yeah, we are bipedal, and so a classical biomechanical analysis of human locomotion would involve the reciprocal flexion and extension of the hip joint in particular. And this is a process which is regulated, thankfully, subconsciously by the tug of the psoas muscle when the back leg gets too far away, when you've already pushed off in the push off phase of gait, as you will read in a textbook. In the push off phase, the psoas then reciprocally pulls the spine all the way, I'm sorry, not the spine, the head of the femur back towards the head, because the head is perceiving that it is now too far in front of that back leg that you just pushed off of. And so that happens in a reciprocal motion of flexion and extension at the hip joint. And because of that subconscious activation of the psoas muscle, you really don't need to think about walking whatsoever, thankfully.
Mm-hmm. So can I, like almost like perpetual motion machines?
Exactly, yeah. And so again, this slides right into something I touched on last time about the role of sensory input on motor output, and I don't think that can be understated. So you have sensory input in the case of walking, namely through the vestibular system, so like where you perceive yourself to be in space. And so if you find yourself, walking blindfolded or walking with earbuds in, you'll realize the changes to your vestibular system and vestibular input can change your gait kind of profoundly. So, but in any case, imagine walking in a vacuum. You're just walking. You perceive the weight of gravity coming down on your head, and as it shifts, you're able to tell the fact that you then need to put another leg underneath your hips so that you have another hip to extend off of, right? And so as you drive yourself forwards with the head, and you lead with the head. People have demonized forward head posture, but you lead with the head, and then the body follows. So it'll pull your hip under you so that you have a foot to stand on, and you just keep going, and that's how you get places. So I think that sums up the biomechanics that I wanted to touch on with regards to gait. Do you have anything to add?
And maybe at what point, because that all seems like a process that can be learned to trust without any thinking at all, right? But at some point we get fucked up. And
Yes.
and what I mean by that is like we get fucked up by wearing these clunker shoes that are high heeled, or we get fucked up by doing all sorts of behaviors that might be just a part of our culture that would make it necessary for us to start thinking more about the process of walking. So at what point does someone need to go back into that more focused, more like becoming more aware of how one walks, so that one can make some nice changes to walking, so walking is easy again, right? Like, I guess is my question.
So that's a good question. I think it's a really good question for me because so I was flat-footed, and I figured out that I was flat-footed when right as I was really getting into weightlifting. And then it was a Pilates instructor who showed me some really simple exercises I could do to strengthen my feet, and that you could like change the way you walk. And I'm like, whoa, okay, cool. This is radical. So that was a big eye opener for me. And I think ever since then, that really made me think about how I walk. And that was, I can speculate a whole bunch about what actually causes flat feet. And it's wild how common it is. But I do think that wearing really supportive shoes, like I wore Birkenstocks as a child, like the high arch support in those is not conducive to good foot health. And so I think that right there, like you already mentioned, set me up to have poor gait. And then I would have like pain in my feet, and that pain would cause me to think about how I was stepping at first just to avoid the pain. And then later on, I was thinking consciously, okay, well, should I be emphasizing my dorsiflexion to really get my arches open, or should I be like really focusing on pushing the ground off, behind me? And let me tell you something, I really don't see the value in thinking about how you walk, and trying to break it up, at least not in the sense of like trying to emphasize or specifically alter your gait in any particular way while you're doing it. And I don't think that there's any value in this, because by doing so, it's sort of like disrespecting your body's self-correcting innate intelligence. And I think that if you do want to make specific changes to the tissues involved, like maybe you do have weak ankles, or maybe you don't have enough like general range of motion in your spine, so your hips are always cranky because they have to work extra hard, then you should be addressing those joints and those tissues specifically, and not while you're walking. And then after you go and get that manual therapy, after you put in that work with that internal focus zoomed in to a reasonable level of magnification, then you take your new body for a walk, and you let the walk serve as that tonic, right? So then it redistributes, and your body will just automatically figure out, oh, this is a more efficient way of locomoting now, right? So because
I love, yeah.
I've never seen anybody, myself included, make a lasting change to their tissues while they're doing something complex and low intensity like walking.
So would this be applicable for someone who maybe they had overly ambitious parents and in an uninformed way? So for example, before they learned naturally through like tummy time and being on the floor as a young one, they were rushed into like those abominable, I think they're abominable, those walkers, like where the babies are like in walkers and supported as they walk. So they missed like these very developmental segments that are very important for the body to develop into a functionally healthy person. And so would this fall in the same category, like, you know, that maybe spending time on the floor and learning how to fucking roll as if for the first time and crawl, like these things may be very impactful in transitioning to you know, walking that feels, you know, more natural.
Yes, but I think that any system that tries to systematize and implement that always falls short. And it's tough because as adults we are so wildly repressed from expressing ourselves physically that we never really allow ourselves to just move however we feels right. And so the value in, you know, spending time on the floor or like rolling down a hill is really contingent on the person's ability to relax. And
Yeah.
that can be tied to a bajillion things, not least of which your diet. Uh, so I made points to, like, you know, specific work at specific tissues to specific joints that you've identified as problematic or deficient. Because that's the surefire way of consciously affecting what's going on. And I think that's, for better or worse, the most efficient way that the human adult can remedy these problems, you know, and sort of consciously, actively unfuck their body.
Well, it's interesting to me that you mentioned repression and how there might be a connection between movement potential or movement options and repression. Like when I was reading The Elusive Obvious by Moshe Feldenkrais, he actually goes into, he talks about very clearly, he's noticed in people he's worked with through his life, he noticed that there was a very clear connection between people who had either missed developmental portions of development and didn't move or couldn't have movement function in certain ways, and like, for example, sexual incompetence and like an inability to be a certain way in the bedroom, and a general feeling mentally of feeling repressed in social situations. And so I think that's just an interesting thing for anyone to think about, that our body and our mind are inseparable aspects of the same functioning whole. And I think that gets I think that gets lip service. I think some people, you know, kind of think that, but I don't think some people realize how profoundly that is true.
Yeah, and personally, I can speak to the repression aspect of it, where uh, I'm happy. I'm happy to admit, like, I will choose privacy and solitude for a majority of my time, and like especially like walking, specifically because I want to be able to take any step I care to in any goofy way that might present itself as fun. Uh, and I don't want to, you know, be conscious of being observed, because that's something that I don't think uh, I or really anybody can get around. Like, you know, when you're being watched, and for better or worse, that always changes your behavior.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about this, because I think that was a topic I had in mind. Actually, was there is a very big difference between walking with a group or walking with another person and walking by ourselves. Like, as a quick story on that, like I was walking with he's a big human. He's so cool. He's also I did a podcast with him actually on Butter Living over a year ago. He's this master mead maker. He's like a mad scientist with making wine out of honey, basically. And anyway, he's into mountain biking and adventuring, and he takes me on a lot of cool adventures. We actually go and hang out and find these water holes up in the mountains that no one knows about. And we do a lot of hiking, and he mentioned to me one time that that we just happen to have a very similar kind of casual, like, and similar gait. He's 6'8", and he's like, but anyway, like, we walk kind of basically naturally alongside each other. And he was mentioning to me that he doesn't like walking with many of his friends because there are very few people where he feels like he either doesn't have to slow down or speed up from his natural pace to like match it with the other person. And so that's just one little example, but you're right. Like the things that I'm capable of reflecting on in a naked way, like in an honest way, and try out and be wacky and be crazy and like go, like, you know, I do something called funny walking, and I'll like walk on the sides of my feet. Like I'll do it right now. Like, I don't know if you can see, but like I like doing stuff like this a lot. And it's just easier to do stuff like that when you're literally by yourself. So I think, yeah, I want to talk about that. Like, total difference, right, between walking by yourself and walking with others.
Yeah, and I mean, I wasn't even referring to walking by myself versus walking with others. I basically never go for walks with people for that reason. But no, I mean, like, I will walk preferably in solitude, just because if there's people around. But in regards to walking like going for a walk with somebody, again, it gets right back to the point I was making about the importance of the vestibular system. Basically, your brain wants to focus on the shared consensual conscious experience that you're having with the other person, and therefore you're going to try and efficiently match the pendulum, the metronomic, the pendulum rhythm of the swing of your hips to the swing of the other person's, because it is efficient and creates cohesion between you and that other person, and that will further allow you and that other person to achieve like resonance in your thoughts and the experience that you're sharing, which is just one of many ways that Zoom calls and the internet is bullshit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, like we're getting into that boat a little bit right now, where I'm clearly walking. I'm walking because I just wanted to get outside, and I think it's fun to add to this experience of doing these, because it is, right, like it is kind of the flavor of this channel, that we're kind of out by ourselves in nature or whatever. But like I was gonna say, like, I'm clearly, like, we're focused in conversation here. We're sharing conversation, and yet I'm walking at the same time. So clearly, like, some other things that I could attend to as far as experiences out in nature, I drown some of that out so that we can share conversation. And so damn internet and Zoom and all that, but here we go.
Yeah. So another question I had.
Yeah.
It's on. Oh, you want to take it?
No, on that note, I am gonna probably, it's pretty sunny. I'm gonna find a little shaded spot and probably plop for a little bit. But
Cool. Yeah.
I was reading about Immanuel Kant. Apparently, he would walk, and I don't know much about his philosophy or the stuff he's written. I just don't. But he would walk at the same exact time every single day, and he would walk the exact same route through town. And he was very, I guess, ritualistic or routine, or just like very strict about it. And it would literally, he'd take off from the house at the exact same clock time, and he would literally not do anything but the same exact route, which he had designed for himself, apparently. And I don't know much about his work, but I've heard that his work is a little bit more disciplined. His writing is a little bit more strict. And so I thought that's amazing. That's interesting to me, because a guy like Nietzsche, his writing was a little more lively. I think it was a little more energetic, especially when he was in his younger years of writing. And he also would just walk wherever. He didn't have any rules about where he walked. He just walked and experienced life as it came to him in whatever way it came. And I thought that was interesting, to learn that the walking style of Kant matched up with his writing style, perhaps. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Uh, not really, other than it's evident, and how could that not? How could somebody's routine and preference towards routine or away from routine not be reflected in their in the fruits of their conscious thought, like writing? That seems quite evident. I'm I'm wildly I'm highly ritualistic, uh, but I never mean to be. I always find myself doing the same thing uh, on a day by day basis, but never by choice, never because I set out to have a routine to get X, Y, and Z done or whatever. You know. So I'm rather I'll try to make routines for myself, and then I'll stop because they never help me. Um, I wanted to ask you though, what do you think's going on? Because I really have 4 points of what's going on with walking here, and it's biomechanically, sure, but what's going on metabolically?
I don't know, but I do know that it's probably something good. I mean, it's not something I've done a whole lot of research on because I've done so much walking in my life. Like walking has literally, and maybe we should swap some stories on walking adventures and stuff because I think that might be at least insightful into who we are. But like walking has been, I mean, I learned it from my mom and my dad. I'm sure they did a lot of walking. My mom was she still is just walks her whole life. She's never done anything for exercise. She's just walked everywhere. And I'm sure I picked some of that up from her. And so I don't know, like metabolically speaking, but I do know that like when I go for a nice walk, it never wrecks me. Like unless I'm walking like 10, 15, like I've done some really long walks, um, 15, 20, 25 miles, kind of thing. Unless I'm doing like really long distance, like it never makes me feel like I'm doing anything but lifting my metabolism or lifting my ability to create energy. Uh, what can you say about that?
Uh, so basically, to answer the word metabolically, muscles at rest preferably burn fat. They only shift into a sugar metabolism when you force them to work beyond their aerobic potential, right? So that means that if you're working your muscles at a within an aerobic capacity, you are essentially burning fat, right? And that's why everyone says you want to do cardio to burn fat and ostensibly to lose weight, and that makes you healthier. So this is true, and therefore people go for jogs rather than going for walks because they're like, oh well, I can burn more calories and burn more fat if I'm jogging than if I'm walking. The thing is that walking, like you said, you never really feel like stressed out by it because it doesn't elevate your heart rate, or at least shouldn't elevate your heart rate that much. You're able to sustain the activity without a consequent rise in cortisol, adrenaline, all the degenerative stress response hormones, right? And while I'm on the topic, like jogging is particularly bad because not only does it promote the release of the free fatty acids, it elevates your cortisol, but it does not come with the same protective factors like a boost in testosterone and growth hormone that strength training does, or even running sprints. Like all the studies on the high intensity interval training are talking about benefit coming from this hormonal response, right? So walking being super low intensity never really will raise your stress hormones and does burn fat. So this is good because your muscles need to be able to run aerobically, running on fat, and they need to be able to do this efficiently. And seen as walking is the locomotive capacity of the body, and we're able to do this in an aerobic manner, it only stands to reason that walking would be the sort of gold standard of aerobic exercise. So I guess that basically sums up the points I was going to make about it. But but then that also segues right into the third question, which is what do you think is going on muscularly, and like what do you feel going on muscularly as you walk, and what do you see in clients going maybe wrong or right muscularly during gait, during a walk?
Well, I think if someone hasn't walked for a long time and they walk a great distance and they're, like, for example, feeling pretty beat up after that, that's not necessarily an indication, right, that they're walking badly. To me, that's just an indication that they haven't been walking enough. Um, that being said, like, there are people who you watch walk, and you can probably attest to this, and you're like, you can see it on their face, or you can clearly see in their posture, or some, you can, there's something about it that doesn't look joyous, and it looks the opposite of that. And I think that to me is a quick indicator, like, hey, okay, there might be some things that we could explore here. I think those are kind of things I look for, like if someone has a hard time walking to the corner to get the mail, or maybe has a hard time with stairs, not in the sense of aerobic capacity, that aerobic capacity idea, but like you just it's hard for them to get into those positions to get up the stairs. Like, these are very clear indicators to me that there's some windows, right, so to speak, that we could be working with or working on. What do you think?
Yeah, totally. I always feel like if somebody can't take the stairs two at a time, they're already dead. Um, Maybe that's a harsh judgment, but no, it's true. And I think there's two sort of obvious faults in somebody's that could go wrong. Two places people could go wrong in walking. And the first one you spoke to was like, if you're getting out of breath, like walking to the mailbox, that should really tell you something. And the other is like, if there's something really like awkward about someone's gait, it's like you can even notice just by watching them. Um, that is almost always indicative of an underlying unresolved injury. Now, what kind of injury? Who knows? But they're carrying that, and basically because their body knows that there is damage that hasn't been resolved in a part of the in tissues, energy isn't going to move there, right? And so I think that really is the heart of the value and the tonic value of walking from a muscular perspective, which is it's really summarized by the word reciprocal, where you have people talk a lot about reciprocal inhibition. That's like a big concept for people in sports and weightlifting, and it doesn't really seem to be applicable in weightlifting, but in gait, we see quite a lot of reciprocal muscle activity, where what I mean by that is, while you have the plantar flexors, the gastrocs, the soleus, and the tibialis posterior, like the back of the calf muscles, and the bottom of the foot muscles, and the back of the hip muscles, all firing on the leg that you're pushing off of. Reciprocally, on the other side of the body, the leg that is being pulled in front of you, right, you have hip flexion occurring. And so you're going to have activation or hopefully you'll have activation in all of the muscles over the front of the leg. And that would connect down over the kneecap and raise the toes up off the ground in dorsiflexion. So in that moment where your body is pushing the ground behind you with that back leg, all those muscles in the back of the back leg are firing, and all the muscles in the front of the leg are being pulled in front of you are firing. So you have the one leg that's in flexion, and the leg that's in flexion, the one that you're about to stand onto, well, for all the time that that leg is being swung in front of you, there is a reciprocal relaxation occurring in the muscles of the back of the front leg. And so this continues perpetually, like, yeah, perpetual motion. And this constant change between activation and relaxation, contraction and relaxation, is really the heart of the tonic value, because it is the ability of a cell to essentially uh, use ATP and then replenish ATP that defines its health. And it's the health of a muscle. The health of a muscle can easily be defined by its ability to contract, but also its ability to relax. So if you have stuff in your body that's stuck, if you have tissues that aren't able to relax, they are going to break that whole chain of reciprocal activation and relaxation, and then you're going to come up with something like a weird gait. And just while I'm on it, I just want to make the point that that reciprocal muscle action does not stay below the waist. Like I said earlier, it occurs through the psoas and through the muscles of the shoulder and the ribs and all of the spine. There is basically no part of the body that isn't engaged in walking.
That's so lovely. Do you think that that could be one of perhaps many aspects of why we can talk about the flow state with walking? I mean, because in my experience, walking allows for us to really slow things down in the sense of like clock time disappearing, and it just seems particularly easy and fun for me to go for a stroll, and so much of what was pressing with a widening perspective and perhaps like a state more akin to like a flow state, like that stuff just disappears. Like stuff that doesn't matter just goes away, and it allows for this kind of presence, and it sounds like biomechanically and what's going on with the muscles too, like that's certainly allowing for this to happen. That's certainly working in conjunction with that idea that we can get into this mental zone, so to speak.
Yeah, and so then last and particularly last, I wanted to ask, like, what's going on cognitively when you're walking? And I think that's really the heart of the conversation.
I was this might be unrelated. Well, I guess it's all related because it's walking. But when I would first go on trips with my wife, like when we were courting, I guess you could say, like we'd go on long trips in the car if we were visiting people or driving places. And after a few hours, or if we'd been in the car for a long time, one of the first things I'd do when I got out of the car was like I'd lay on the ground in the parking lot or on the side of the road or wherever and do some glute bridges, some real slow, where I could really feel my butt muscles, like my ass, um, like ten- tension, filled with tension and activating or waking up. I would think, and I'd feel the reciprocally. I'd feel the front side of my body like loosening as my glutes were activated, and it always made it easier subsequently right away to walk or feel like as if I could move again, because being in the car for a long time, like, I don't know how you feel, but it always sucks to me. I just don't like being in one position for a long time. And so my wife used to think I'm crazy. Now she knows I'm crazy. But I mean, that kind of goes into it, right? I've had clients before, like we're walking and it's like sometimes some clients, we just go for walks and we talk and we build that relationship and we walk. And some clients, like we'll take a break, we'll do some glute bridges, and their subsequent walking is totally different. So I mean, is this a viable way to kind of bring some different kind of on switches, so to speak, into the ballgame?
Yeah, of course. And I would never imagine working out and not pacing around in between sets. You know, um, I kind of admire the people who can just sit on the bench or like right in the machine in between sets and just focus on their breath and restoring their energy. I think that's really impressive. But yeah, I always find myself walking around, and I do also hate sitting in the car for a really long time. Um, yeah, but for me, walking, it gives me it gives me access to a higher state of energy, and if I have that, then it's a reminder to my brain that my body is indeed functioning just fine. And I think that reassurance uh, really helps me sometimes through a blue day, or through or coping with something that I really can't change in my life, you know?
I'm bringing up Nietzsche again because he has a cool quote where he said he wouldn't trust any thought born of immobility. In other words, like, and there's a few different translations of that, and I think he said it a lot, but like he literally wouldn't write anything down or trust something that was going through his brain unless it was born of him strolling out in the countryside or wherever.
I also feel as though when I don't like to write while I walk, and I also don't particularly like to listen to like a lecture or something, or read while I walk. I find that walking is a better chance for me to sort of subconsciously organize my brain, and that things fall into place really, really quite naturally, and I'm able to know what I know, to learn what I have already learned, um, and refine that in such an easy and effortless manner while I am walking. So I feel like its tonic effects are educational as well, you know?
Yeah, on that line of thinking, would you be able to posit some supplemental uh, accessories or adjuncts to a walk that might even more steer us into that direction of it being such a powerful form of exploring thoughts and self-awareness and getting into that zone place. I know I asked Ray this once. I wrote him an email and I said, Ray, like, you know, like some of my favorite times in the last 3 or 4 years were when you know, I had like 250 or 300 milligrams of theanine about an hour before, and then I had a little, maybe an ounce or two of Parmigiano Reggiano and some tonic water and an aspirin, and then I went for a walk in the country. And some of these walks, like, and not that any walk is better than any other, but like, I love it so much, and it certainly doesn't hurt to have some of these like maybe anti-serotonergic substances or possibilities in play, right? Like when we go for a stroll. Have you noticed any of that, or have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, so I'll do my best to quote or paraphrase him, but he says, he was making this point how when you're healthy, you realize that your consciousness extends into the recent past, the moment, and into the future as far as you choose to speculate. And given the right set of internal and external inputs, the right sort of cocktail, even under sort of sickly conditions, you can have access to all of that information all at once. Um, so yeah, the easiest way to improve the value of a walk, I think, would be to start by going for a hike somewhere you've never been. Um, when people decide to go for a hike, there's this big shift in like the commitment. They see more value rather than just taking a walk, and so then also the novelty of the scenery, even if it's like, you know, like all the trails in Maine look identical, but even if it's in the same place that you live with the same sort of species of trees and everything, it doesn't need to be some breathtaking view, but just a different path, I think, can lend itself to that novelty, the idea that something new is happening, that that you're living a new day. But internally, yeah, sure, like substances that you could consume. Of course, people get, smoke weed and take walks, and I've certainly done that as well. Though, ironically, you were mentioning the anti-serotonergic aspects, and weed is highly serotonergic. So I'm not sure I would even recommend that, but probably not being too hungry uh, would be a good one, or maybe bringing something that you can consume at any point whenever you choose to. Just knowing that you have food is probably, and food that you like is probably a good way to really make sure it's not a stressful event. And it sounds crazy, like you're babying yourself or whatever, like bring your snacks, but yeah, you really can't outsmart the monkey brain or the lizard brain. Like you want to have food with you. Sure, like things that would keep the free fatty acids low, I think would be a no-brainer if you're like going to go for a long hike or something. Like niacinamide, aspirin, uh, yeah, tonic water, of course, quinine. Any of these things would be good. Yep.
Well, the psychedelic mushrooms, right? Like those are pretty powerful example of like a low serotonin state, right? They can really deplete or whichever it is, either speeding the uptake of serotonin, getting used or removed, or inhibiting its creation. But it certainly, at least from experience too, seems to really bring you into that low serotonin state. And I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but most of the times, and I haven't done, maybe 4 times, I've experienced the psilocybin, trip, and it's always been like walking or out in nature or on a levee, or the handful of times it's been out in nature, and I think that's usually where I've heard people might experience this kind of thing. But I'm sure that doesn't hurt. I'm sure that goes right in line with the experience.
Sure. And I also, yeah, there's essentially, a good walk and a bad walk. And I would say that a bad walk is the one that you bring your step counter and you're still living in the office. Your brain hasn't left, the job or whatever is stressing you out, and you think you're just getting the job done. And you put your steps in this box of a walk, and you get from here to there, and then it's over. And I think that it's like walking with blinders on. You fail to see the value and choose to not look at the opportunity of the experience that you might be able to have uh, while you're escaping a sedentary state.
What do you think would happen, Liam, if everyone in the world, not just for the Earth's health, but our own health, started walking everywhere we could instead of driving, and parking farther from the grocery store and walking in? I guess that's a minor example, and then not driving at all is the major example. But what would happen to our world and our health in general? Like, do you think this would have a profound? I speculate on this sometimes. Do you think it would have a really profound impact on world behavior?
No, no. I mean, it would. I shouldn't say no. It would, but it wouldn't happen, and nor do I really think that it ought to, because that alone wouldn't really shift the way that people look at the way we live our lives, and how they live their lives, enough to really make the positive changes. And instead, it would just be a whole bunch of people walking around. I don't know. Maybe people would have fun talking to their neighbors as they happen to coincide in a walk to the grocery store, rather than, angry that their neighbor is tailgating them in a car. I love driving. I don't like being in the car sitting down, but I love driving. I think cars are phenomenal. I'm so glad to live in a time on Earth where there are cars.
I like that gratitude and that perspective, and maybe it's a catch-22 kind of thing. Like if people were walking more and not using their cars, then all those other behaviors like probably happened first. Like there probably would have been a radical shift in fundamental thinking And then as a part of that, as an aspect of that, people are walking more. Not the other way around. Not like people are walking more and then now all these other things happen. I see that as a possibility. I think it's interesting the way you spun that. What are some, Liam, what are some of your favorite walking stories or adventures? Do you have any personal accounts that you think would be fun to bring up?
I guess what comes to mind would probably be a couple months back in May of really spinning my wheels, not having enough to do. And, you know, like I've taken myself for so many walks in my life, and I've like made routines to involve walking, and I've never owned a dog. So it's like I'm always just walking myself. And I was just amazed. I was further north in Maine at the time. It's gorgeous on the river there. And I was just so impressed at how taking a walk, leaving my phone in the car for an hour really did get me around and out, away from feeling sorry for myself, despite myself. Like I knew that I was taking a walk trying to improve my mood, and I didn't even really believe it would work, and yet it did, you know. And it was just on some trail that I'd never been on before, and I kind of got a little lost, and that's always the best, when I get a little bit lost and I don't really know how far I'm going to need to walk to get back to my car. And just that happened, and you know, it totally was the key, and it unlocked the shitty, uncomfortable feelings I was dealing with.
That's cool. I mean, that was going to kind of lead into my next question anyway, and you did it. You answered it. It is that like the therapy aspect, or that we find ourselves drawn to movement that is easy and pleasurable. We either are drawn to it because we know it'll work, or we think it'll work, or we've heard it'll work, and it does, or because we just are naturally drawn to it in a kind of unthinking kind of way. We're just drawn to doing something that will be that active therapy. Like for me, like I can't think of an experience where I was wrestling with some huge relationship issue or social issue, or just like or like wrestling with something in my mind, like a existential, you know, issue, or something where I didn't go for a walk. And I've done it, you know, obviously at all times of the day, but like I find myself not as much anymore, but like middle of the night. Like some of my best memories of walking are like literally I'm like, man, I just don't want to go to sleep right now. I know walking isn't going to really like burn through my energy too much. If anything, it'll just make me feel more alive, and why not in the moonlight and just take off and see what happens. And walking for hours, like one of my favorite memories, I just thought of this. I was dating a girl at the time at UC Davis. I was in college, and it happened to be one of the foggiest nights that I can ever remember in Davis, California. Like you couldn't see farther than 5 feet in front of you, and most of the time it was probably 1 foot. You just couldn't see anything. It was so damn foggy. And it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and we went for a walk. And I like to walk golf courses sometimes. So this particular night we were walking the golf course, like the Davis Municipal Golf Course. And it was just like it was eerie, it was mysterious, it was damp, it was foggy. You couldn't see anything. And every once in a while you could see like trees poke up through the fog. And you were like walking in, like you were walking in literally a pool of haze, or whatever, you know, whatever you say about fog, like. And so stuff like that, like you can't make that up. I mean, it just happens sometimes. But like that's part of my love affair with walking, like stuff like that.
It reminds me that every time I realize that I'm falling in love with a girl, it's always while I'm on a walk with her, you know.
A couple stories about that. I want to hear more on that with you, because I feel like there might be some personal stuff that
Yeah.
could come out of that. But my wife, right? Like the first time we hung out, we walked through the streets of downtown Sacramento, and she lived just outside of downtown Sacramento, and we walked for 4 hours, and we didn't know what time it was. It just happened later that we found out that we had been walking for 4 hours. and we didn't know where we were walking. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't eat. We didn't drink. We walked and we talked for 4 hours straight. And then we landed on our porch at like, I think 9 p.m. or later that evening. And we sat on our porch and we talked for like 3 or 4 hours, or probably longer than that actually, on our porch. And that was it. Like, that was it. Like that was totally it. I knew that she was my wife. And I think a couple times when we've talked about it, like I know that she maybe felt that way about me. When we got married, it was kind of a compromise, a really good compromise. Like, we got married on a pullout on the side of Highway 1 between Bodega Bay and Jenner, like literally on a bluff top overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a random bluff top. And we got like 20 or 30 of our favorite people in the world there to celebrate. I had wanted to go backpacking and pack like my suit and her dress in a backpack, and like our buddy who's a philosopher at Fordham University, he married us, and so I wanted him and me and Shaylin to walk and go backpacking and get married in the middle of nowhere, wherever, somewhere far away from everybody, like except for other life, just not humans. And she entertained it, but not very long, and she wanted some of those other people there. And so we compromised and we did it on a bluff top. But like, yeah, walking is, I want to hear more with your love stories as relates to walking.
I don't know if I even have them in circulation in my memory. As much of a cop out as that might sound, I think the closing points that I'd like to make about walking, and I'm really just making sure that I didn't forget or replacing the fact that I forgot them, were about, oh geez, it's really loud. Were about the feet and the role of the arch, and how we have this measure of all-cause mortality collapsing into grip strength, right?
Yep.
But we totally, and that's really interesting, but we totally neglect the fact that we have grips on the bottom of our feet, and that the strength of the arch is specifically the grip, the strength of the grip that you have on the ground beneath you. And as anyone who lifts weights knows, like sometimes you have a better grip on things, or if the weight's too heavy, you can't get a good grip on something. And when you realize that for any number of reasons, muscular problems, energetic deficiency, anything really, if your feet aren't pulling their weight, literally and figuratively, you're gonna have some real problems. And you were talking about how shoes mess people up. Shoes really mess people up. Nobody builds aesthetic and functional forearms lifting weights with straps and gloves, right? So the idea that our lower legs would achieve like health and beauty aesthetics while we walk around with heel support or arch support, or while we lift weights with heel support and arch support, it's so asinine.
I love that you brought this up. I'd like to post some research, because there is, like, I say I don't really get into research, but like we do. We read things and we try to devour that stuff actually. But like there's some really compelling research on what you said. The grip strength is correlated with all-cause mortality or length of life, right? And that the stronger someone is in terms of grip strength, there's some good evidence to suggest that just like makes you probably have a chance of living longer. And you're right about the feet. Like one thing with like my shoes, this has been a process, and it will continue to be a process. But I do a lot of barefoot walking now, which is the best thing in terms of feeling the earth, getting in touch, getting that connection with the ground underneath our feet. But I like you, like experienced a lot of time in like these real thick-soled shoes, and I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I started to experience the difference. And now I have these things called soft stars. They're basically like being barefoot with a small Vibram sole, like a 5 millimeter Vibram sole. There's no difference between the toes and the heels. But anyway, they have a wide toe base too. And so when you talk about being able to grip the ground and experience the earth and experience that connection and that the way we walk, like I do think that makes a big difference. And you know, there's obviously places where we can't go barefoot, and for whatever reason, maybe we don't really kind of know what's out there. It's too rocky. There's jagged, you know, stuff around. Like, and then, you know, the next best thing is some kind of shoe that allows us to still get close to that connection. But I'm really glad you touched on that, because I think the feet, that's where it starts. At least it seems like that's where the relationship of ourselves and the earth comes together, and it really is a relationship. So I like that you brought that up.
Yep. Yeah, it's
I
big.
think it was Lao Tzu, maybe not Lao Tzu, maybe it was Lao Tzu. Like, walk as if your feet are kissing the earth, or something like that.
Yeah.
That's resonated with me.
Well, you know, like, you never would squeeze your coffee mug as hard as you would squeeze the barbell that you're going to deadlift, right? And so having the ability to, it's not a matter of always, you know, making each step as muscularly engaged as possible, but that ability to sort of regulate the amount of energy that's going through your feet into the ground is, and the direction that you're applying that force in, I think is critical to walking and most activities in life. That being said, man,
like the right effort for the right task, right? And that's always changing.
exactly. That being said, man, I'm watching the sun creep behind the trees here, so I'm gonna let you go and jump in this body of water here.
I love it. And speaking of water, maybe next week, I think we danced around the idea of making it about water, and doing some stuff related to swimming or just being in water in general, which I feel like you have a lot more experience with that than me. I've been more of a land explorer. So like I look forward to that. Maybe next week we'll get into the water stuff.
Love it. I'm looking forward to it, man. It was way fun as usual.
Ditto. Have a great swim, and I'll talk to you next week.